Okay, so we are going to be doing chapter, just one second. Okay, we are going to be doing chapter 46 of Tanya. And as I mentioned a few minutes ago, every chapter of Tanya really has its beauty. Like I always begin saying, oh, this chapter is really beautiful. But the truth is that even if one was to begin learning Tanya in the middle, and many people have asked me, oh, can I join the class even if it's in the middle? Yes, because every chapter of Tanya, although it is a continuation and sometimes does build on concepts that we have learned previously, it is also really a standalone chapter. Now, this chapter of Tanya is really, really, really interesting because, of course, the whole Tanya is focusing on how to love Hashem and therefore, study Torah and do mitzvahs. And excuse me, everybody, my voice is not fully there, so that's why it sounds a little hoarse. But this chapter of Tanya, the Alter Rebbe introduces the concept of loving Hashem, the technique of loving Hashem in this chapter, not just as accessible, because the whole of Tanya is accessible, right? The whole of Tanya starts off, the title page of Tanya starts off with the words that Moshe Rabbeinu told the nation of Israel, that ki karev elecha hadavar ma'od, that it is close to you, b'ficha, b'lvavcha, la'asaysay, in thought, speech, and action, etc. It is accessible. Someone just asked, we're doing chapter 46 today. It is accessible to you, and you're able to love Hashem. And of course, the Alter Rebbe gives techniques on how to do that. But this chapter, the Alter Rebbe introduces as a technique, and he will tell us that it is a technique that is not only accessible, karev, which means near, but can also mean very accessible, very practical. But Alter Rebbe now is introducing a technique to loving Hashem, which he says, karev hadavar ma'od ma'od. He uses a double language, double lashon. He uses the word ma'od twice. It is extremely, extremely accessible, this technique that the Alter Rebbe is going to begin discussing in chapter 46. Now, why is that? The reason is because all the ways, all the approaches that have been previously given by the Alter Rebbe to reach a level of love and fear, which, as we may remind ourselves, love and fear are the wings of our mitzvahs. They are what enable our mitzvahs to reach higher than our souls itself, to actually unite with Hashem on a very deep level. All those ways are considered close and accessible and relevant because of the nature of a Jew's godly soul. A Jew's godly soul loves Hashem. That is, by nature, it's a fact. It cannot be disputed. A Jew's godly soul loves Hashem, but very often that love is very hidden. Either it's hidden, has to be revealed, or it has to be produced by one's intellect. But it exists because the fact is that a Jew's godly soul loves Hashem. And obviously there are many different levels. And since the godly soul is hidden in the animal soul, in fact, we've spoken about, especially last chapter, when we spoke about having compassion for the godly soul, it's not only hidden within the animal soul, it is imprisoned within the animal soul. And therefore, work has to be done on our parts to reveal that love in the godly soul. So yes, it exists, but we have to do our part to reveal it, to produce it, but it is the nature of the godly soul. This chapter, however, the Alter Rebbe is going to discuss the nature of the animal soul and how easy it is for the animal soul to love Hashem. Isn't that amazing? Because usually the animal soul really, really bothers us, obstructs us, disturbs our love of Hashem. But here, the Alter Rebbe is going to tell us about a certain quality of love, which we can apply to all of our relationships, in fact, that shows us how easy it is for us to arouse a love of Hashem, not only in the godly soul, but in the animal soul, which is very, very innovative, right? Because one would think that the animal soul just loves itself and doesn't necessarily love Hashem. Okay, so on what do we base this? Shlomo HaMelech wrote a book called Mishlei. Mishlei is actually a set of instructions. One of the things that he wrote in Mishlei, you might be familiar with, is the pasuk, Kamayim hapanim lepanim, kain lev ha'adam el ha'adam. Just as one sees one's reflection in the water, in the olden days they didn't have mirrors, so if a person wanted to see their reflection, they would have to look into a pond of water, into a body of water. Just as one sees one's reflection in a body of water, so too a person's heart reflects the other person's heart. Now, what does that mean? Since Mishlei is a set of instructions on how to live our life, the basic meaning of this is that if somebody shows you love and affection and kindness, you should not be ungrateful and you should reciprocate. You should show them this love back. If their heart shows you love and kindness, you should show them back love and kindness. That is an instruction from Shlomo HaMelech. But the Alter Rebbe goes deeper and says this is not only an instruction, but this is a fact. A person who is devoted in his love to another person arouses a love in that person. So that actually the friend loves him back by nature. It's automatic. And even, the Alter Rebbe goes so far to say that even if the second party doesn't know of the first party's love, he still starts loving that other person because it's by nature that it reflects back. It's like a reaction. If you love another person, the other person loves you back, even if they don't know that you love them. Even more so when the person does see the love. If you do see the love of another person, of course you reciprocate that love back. It's natural. It's automatic, and it's equal to the original love. It's reciprocal, just like a mirror, just like a person sees his reflection in a body of water, so too the heart reflects back. Reciprocal love is involuntary and natural. We return love by nature. We return love by nature. It's in our nature, which is why, by the way, and here the Alter Rebbe gives us a technique. When we feel distant, when we feel that a person is distant, how do we get them to feel closer to us? By showing them love. By showing them love, not by showing them distance. Because distance can be reciprocal too. But when we show a person love, they have no choice but to love back. That is the nature of love. And this love exists in the animal soul and is accessible to all. Okay, now, this nature of love, right, exists between peers. There does sometimes exist an obstacle. Sometimes it does happen that a person doesn't love back. Okay, excuse me 1 second. Okay, let's hope that we'll be able to keep going. Sometimes a person actually does not return the love or doesn't realize that he is being loved. This is as a result of different preoccupations or worries that the person may have that is actually hiding the love of the other person, right? So therefore, the person doesn't reciprocate. But it's not so difficult to make a person aware by bringing back his focus and saying, hello, you're worried about A, B, C, so you're not realizing that the other person actually loves you, right? We're talking about relationships. We're talking about relationships between parents and children, between spouses, between just friends, right? Sometimes one does become temporarily unaware, so therefore is not able to reciprocate the love. But it is not that hard to make a person bring back his focus and become more aware of the love. But we are talking here about a love between peers, equals, right? But how about a love which exists between two people who are very, very, very distant? And here the Alter brings a mushal, a parable, as in the case of a king and a commoner, right? If one is able to reciprocate love between two peers, and it is easy to reciprocate this love between two equals, two peers, how much more so the love that exists between a king and a commoner. So now let's examine this mushal that the Alter Rebbe brings. The Alter Rebbe says the king, he brings a mushal about a great king and a lowly commoner to emphasize the distance between the two, that the king is very great and the commoner is very low. And yet the king shows his love to the commoner. How does the king show his love to the commoner? He comes down from his place of honor, right? Usually the king doesn't go into places of commoners. But in this case, the king comes down from his place of honor together with all of his ministers and servants, which increases the show of love because he comes with his whole entourage, right? And he lifts the commoner up. The commoner is in a gutter. He's a lowly commoner stuck in the gutter, in the dirt of the street. And he lifts him up from the dirt. And what does he do with him? He brings him not only to a clean place, but he brings him back to his palace. He finds this commoner and he brings him back to this palace. And not only to his palace, but he brings him to his inner chamber, a place where no servants or ministers even go. So now he leaves his ministers and servants outside, and he brings the lowly commoner into his inner chamber, a very private place, together with the king. And there he embraces the commoner and he kisses him. He shows him an attachment of love. And this in turn does what? This in turn arouses a double and quadruple love in the heart of the lowly commoner towards the king. Imagine how grateful this lowly commoner must feel that the king has saved him from his misfortune of being stuck in the lowly gutter. And he has endless gratitude and love to the king. And by the way, even if this lowly commoner, this lowly person, has a heart like a stone, the Alter Rebbe says to us, and he's never even experienced love or affection, because a person who has never experienced love or affection has a hard time loving back, right? Even so, through this closeness and intimacy of the king, that the king shows him, his heart melts and he becomes like water, and his soul will pour out with like water with a longing and a love for the king, which is quite an incredible mushal if you think about it. Now, obviously, this is referring to Hashem and us, and the Alter Rebbe will give examples of in our history of how Hashem took us out of the gutter. In coming chapters, Hashem, the Alter Rebbe will remind us that Hashem takes us out of the gutter daily, actually. But what's interesting here is that in other kinds of love that we've been speaking about in Tanya up till now, the lowliness of a person is an impediment to loving Hashem. In other words, the lowliness of a person has to be overcome by contemplation. The closeness that one feels with Hashem occurs in spite of the lowliness of the person, right? We have to remind ourselves that we're really, a piece of God, etc., in spite of our lowliness. But in this kind of love, this reciprocal love of the animal soul, the lowliness, in other words, the distance that we are from Hashem, actually contributes to the love that we feel for Hashem. We merely have to recognize it and realize that despite our lowliness, Hashem reaches out and brings us close. Not only despite, but because of our lowliness, Hashem comes down to our level and elevates us to his level and brings us close. We can contemplate for hours and hours, and indeed this chapter goes into detail, which I won't go into here because we're just, summarizing the chapter. But when we contemplate Hashem's greatness, how Hashem transcends all the worlds and Hashem fills all the worlds, and he has superior worlds and inferior worlds and different chambers and angels, the angels actually ask a question. The angels ask, Ayeh Mekoim Kavoidoi, where is the place of Hashem's glory? And the answer is Meloi Kol Haaretz Kavoidoi. Hashem fills the earth with his glory. Hashem abandons the higher and the lower worlds and chooses us, chooses Bnei Yisrael. And the main example that Alter Rebbe brings here, how does he choose us? By having taken us out of Egypt. Hashem himself, you know how we read in the Haggadah? How Hashem himself took us out, not through angels and not through ministers, but Hashem himself came down to a lowly place in order to bring us to a higher place, in order to give us the Torah, in order to embrace us and kiss us, which we've spoken about before, how learning Torah is like kissing God. It's an exchange of breath, and how doing mitzvahs is an embrace of Hashem. And he has enabled us to reach a very, very intimate place of connection with him through giving us Torah mitzvahs. And that is actually why when we do a mitzvah that has a bracha, we say, Asher Kiddishanu b'mitzvaysav. We say, blessed be Hashem, Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu, Melech Haolam, blessed be Hashem, our God, the King of the world. Asher Kiddishanu b'mitzvaysav. So simply that means who has sanctified us with his mitzvahs. But the word Kiddishanu, firstly, is similar to the word Kiddushin, which is marriage. So first of all, Hashem gave us the mitzvahs in order to be on a level of closeness with us like a marriage, of embracing and kissing. Secondly, Kiddushin also means separation. Hashem has taken us out, has separated us. And lastly, Kiddushin means elevation. Not only has Hashem sanctified us, but Hashem has elevated us to the level of himself through doing Torah and mitzvahs. And that itself motivates us when we contemplate what is the whole point of this discussion that is now going to take place of reciprocal love. And it continues in the next chapter. The point is, how do we reciprocate the love? Love is actually a verb. We reciprocate the love when we contemplate the fact that Hashem chose us. He did not choose all the higher worlds and the angels, etc. Hashem is very distant from us and yet came down to a very low level and chose us, took us out of Mitzrayim, gave us the mitzvahs, and elevates us to his level, which is higher than the worlds we are in. By doing Torah and mitzvahs as a result of this love, we become connected to Hashem on a level of infinite and intimate holiness. Now, what happens is that sometimes we're not aware of it, right? Because of the fact that we are in a coarse body, and there are different negative forces in this world obstructing, concealing godliness, right? And we also have worries and preoccupations, etc. But this chapter reminds us that simply by remembering and by bringing our focus back, this enables us to connect with Hashem even on the same level as a tzaddik, the Alter Rebbe tells us. And you know how we know this? Because the punishment for a mitzvah, or for an aveira, for a sin, is the same. Doesn't matter which level you're on, right? So let's say you know more than somebody else who knows less. If you sin and he sins, the punishment, according to Torah and according to whatever Hashem decides to do, is going to be the same because the sin is the same. The opposite is true as well. The opposite is true as well, that when we do a mitzvah, we connect with Hashem with an everlasting bond and an intimate bond. It's the same mitzvah that the tzaddik did. So yes, maybe the tzaddik has, as we've discussed many, many times in Tanya, the tzaddik has a greater, more revealed love of longing and fire and water and etc. But the result is the same. The result is by doing a mitzvah that we connect with Hashem on an intimate level. We reciprocate the love. And that is what doing Torah mitzvahs is all about. Because if Hashem, let's say the grand king in the very great king in the mashal, were to take the lowly person out of the gutter and bring him into his inner chambers, but the lowly person would not feel gratitude, that means that the lowly person would not reciprocate the love. The Alter Rebbe says that is not possible because it is not the nature of love. The nature of love is to reciprocate, and when we become reminded and our focus is brought back to the great love that Hashem feels for us, we then are able to reciprocate the love. And thinking about this chapter of Tanya, it is going to go into further detail next chapter, but thinking about this chapter of Tanya, what comes to mind is gratitude. Sometimes we really don't feel that Hashem loves us. And the antidote to that is to just remember to start feeling gratitude for the things we do have. Once we start doing that, and I can tell you, once you start doing it on a daily basis, you start remembering, oh, the other things seem so big and make us seem that maybe Hashem doesn't love us, the challenges, the worries, etc. But we have so much good in our lives. And when we remember that and bring back our focus, we are then able to reciprocate the love by doing Torah and mitzvahs. So that is this chapter in a nutshell. Any comments, questions?
Fabulous.
It's a very easy tool, Tanya tells us, the Alter Rebbe tells us. It's a reciprocal love, which is the nature of the animal soul. Animal soul, not godly soul, animal soul.
I do a little bit of therapy with people, and now the buzzword is all narcissistic. Someone's narcissistic, and if they're narcissistic, these are red flags, and you should leave them, and you should narcissistic parents, and people are just all into leaving. But they forget that people say that narcissistic is because somebody was hurt, and therefore they put on themselves walls and walls and walls, and that's why that's their behavior. And it's not a very fashionable nowadays attitude, but I totally believe that if the narcissist was loved enough, they would be comfortable to break down the walls, whatever hurt them.
No.
Well, that's what I believe. That has helped me with.
Please don't tell this to anybody. This is hurtful to hear it. Don't say this.
But let me ask you something. The opposite would be that people who have narcissistic parents or narcissistic spouses or something like that, the opposite would be that you are going to continue being angry with them and distancing them. And in the long run, will that be a more helpful lifestyle for you? Would that be a pleasanter, more nice lifestyle to be hating them? Or would it be a more nicer lifestyle to try and love them and try break down their walls of whatever hurt them?
Okay, so
Let's
I
say
just want to
somebody in your
interrupt over
life
here
that
for
you
1 second. I just want to interrupt
yeah,
1 second. And I just want to say that I think this is a very important discussion, but I will say that I think there's probably a difference.
for
Today,
sure.
what is happening today is that we label very easily. So I think that what Shalamis is referring to is a real mental disorder. And what you are referring to, Nomi, is the way people are very easy and able to just label people. And that may not necessarily be a disorder. So there's a difference between a person acting very selfishly and actual disorder called narcissism, which is a whole other discussion. And yes, a
Right,
person may have to show love to that narcissist by distancing themselves. But that's another
right.
discussion.
Right.
Over here,
100%. It also
right.
100% depends if that person is a distant cousin or a spouse or a child or a parent, somebody that your relationship, has to, would be better off if you worked on it as opposed to not. But this idea of giving love until that person feels comfortable enough to get over the hurt is just something I believe in.
Right. I think that most commonly this example can be seen nowadays when we have, unfortunately, many children, let's say, leaving the path of Yiddishkeit or being
Right,
angry, and they don't think you love them. You don't have to. You don't have to tell them you love them. You just have to love them, and eventually that love will be reciprocated, because that's the nature of love. You cannot love a person without it being reciprocated. And that's what the Alter Rebbe is saying here, that Hashem loves us, and therefore automatically we reciprocate it. Now, if we're not reciprocating yet, it's because we just have lost our focus and we haven't realized there's so many things covering, hiding that love for Hashem. But when we think about it, and it doesn't have to be deep contemplation because it's the animal soul, we think about how much good we have in our lives. And as we'll see next chapter, how Hashem takes us out of Mitzrayim, our own personal limitations every single day, we will reciprocate that love.
anyway, beautiful. As again, between me and Shamus and the discussion, it really has so many factors to it, but this concept of giving love and it will be reciprocated is works so beautifully for so many things.
Yes, for sure.